What's something that sounds like a conspiracy theory but is actually true? Story 1. Operation Snow White. Basically, during the 70s, the Church of Scientology was concerned with all the bad press surrounding them and all the other dirt on them that could be released. So they used a huge number of contacts that they had in various US government agencies to destroy all negative information about the Church of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard. The crazy thing is, they succeeded with much of the plan before they were caught. There was a crap ton of negative info on Scientology in the 70s, possibly enough to destroy the church, and it'll never see the light of day because they used their huge influence to have it destroyed. Story 2. In 2002, a cable technician named Mark Klein, working for AT&T in San Francisco, was sitting at his desk when he received an email from his bosses that a representative from the National Security Agency, NSA, would be coming to visit for some unspecified reason. He was to give this NSA technician access to a cable substation for him to perform some work. The tech did his thing and Mark moved on without thinking anything of it. A year later, in 2003, Mark was transferred to that cable substation and by chance was assigned to monitor the internet room. This was the room where all the fiber optic ocean cables that carry the country's internet traffic terminate. While he was reviewing engineering drawings, he realized that the schematics revealed a secret room. More importantly, the plans showed cabinets filled with fiber optic splitters coming off every cable and feeding into the secret room. And to make it even crazier, neither he nor anyone on his team had access to the secret room. Through his investigation, he discovered that the NSA representative he had escorted the previous year had worked to install this system, which was sending a copy of all the internet traffic that passed through the substation straight to the NSA. In other words, he had proof that the federal government had the capacity to tap into all internet traffic in the country. And I mean all of it. Every email, instant message, electronic sale, medical or criminal records, research databases, everything. Complete unrestricted access. Like any sane person, he was extremely disturbed by this discovery. He went to his higher OPS, but was essentially told to just keep it quiet. After retiring in 2004, he linked up with a group called Electronic Frontier Foundation and essentially blew the whistle. He did interviews and handed over all his evidence to reporters. I watched one of these interviews in 2006, which is how I know about this story. I remember thinking it was so obvious once he explained it. Why wouldn't the NSA tap into the internet traffic in the age of the War on Terror? I watched Enemy of the State, but nothing happened. No one I spoke to seemed to believe it, and Mark Klein's story eventually seemed to just fade away. 7 years later, in 2013, Edward Snowden leaked documents essentially confirming everything and then some. But to this day, everyone looks at me like a crazy person when I talk about knowing about it as early as 2006. Story 3. The Greenbrier Bunker. People love conspiracies about huge underground complexes built for the rich and famous to survive nuclear fallouts. Think Denver Airport. And that's exactly what Greenbrier is. The bunker was built under the Greenbrier Resort for congresspeople to escape to, and was kept a secret for 30 years. Even though people suspected, why is there a 7,000-foot airstrip for a town of 3,000 people? For the entire time, it was functional. Every congressperson was assigned a bunk. These days, you can take tours, and I'm sure we'll hear about the next bunker once it's defunct. Story 4. That the US government actually had a paranormal unit. That movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, it was based on a true story. The US military was actively trying to see if they could find people with skills like stopping the heart of a goat, or dowsing, or psychic spying. The whole thing pretty much fell apart when it was deemed that the people participating were not very effective. If you have to stare at a goat for hours in order to get it to fall over and die, how are they supposed to make use of it for assassinations? But bottom line, it did exist. Same with the Germans having a paranormal unit during the 40s. Hitler believed in acquiring the Spear of Destiny because he believed it would help him win the war, along with other occult stuff. That's partly what the Wolfenstein games have made popular. Story 5. The Pentagon has an insane number of bathrooms because as they were building it, the segregation of bathrooms ended. Read into it that it says more about the times and the bureaucracy of institutional racism than anything else. The Pentagon is physically located in Virginia. At the time of its construction, Virginia was a segregated state, but the federal government had desegregated via Executive Order 8802 a few months prior to construction commencing. In the early phases of the project, the governor of Virginia pressured the planners, insisting that Virginia law and building codes mandated separate but equal bathroom facilities. In the interest of expediency and to not inflame racial tensions amongst a project labor force that had already had several brawls break out along racial lines, the planners, which included Leslie Grove, whose next assignment was the Manhattan Project, Matt Damon's character in Oppenheimer, inserted the additional bathrooms into the design, figuring they'd keep the project on track, and would also prevent costly renovations in case the political winds changed and 8,802 was ever rescinded, legislated against, or lost court challenges. Story 6. Big Tobacco Cover-Up is a prime example. For decades, tobacco companies knew about the harmful and addictive effects of smoking, but actively suppressed research, manipulated data, and marketed cigarettes as safe. It wasn't until the 1990s, after internal documents were leaked, that the truth about their deceitful practices was fully exposed. They also have radiation in them that they've known about for decades because of the naturally occurring isotopes in the soil, sticking to the leaves more because of the chemicals they use on them, makes the cancer rates even after a long period of not smoking, etc. Make a lot of sense. Don't have the time to link the source currently, but the EPA recently released info about it that should be easily searchable. We'll likely add an edit with the link when I have a moment. Story 7. A main ingredient in the flavor of Coca-Cola still only comes from processing cocoa leaves into cocaine. The extract goes to the Coca-Cola flavor profile, and the cocaine that is produced as a byproduct gets sold to the health industry for medicinal use. There is only one company in the U.S. authorized to do this that has had a special arrangement with the DEA for nearly 100 years. Story 8. In the 60s and 70s, thousands of Native American women were sterilized without their consent as part of a practice to sterilize poor and minority women to help their financial situation and their families' quality of life by preventing unwanted pregnancies in poor communities. Some were not informed at all and had it done to them completely without their knowledge. Others were threatened with having their health care taken away if they did not agree to have it done to them. Some studies estimate that as many as 25 to 50% of Native American women were sterilized in the 1970s, representing tens of thousands of victims. This is essentially a modern-day genocide in the United States. Story 9. Nestlé's baby formula scandal. Nestlé aggressively marketed baby formula to mothers in developing countries by giving free samples to hospitals and buying up billboards. The mothers would use them instead of breast milk and eventually stop producing breast milk. Then they'd need to buy formula to continue feeding their babies. Formulas needed to be mixed with water, but because they often didn't have clean water, they'd put their babies at risk mixing the formula with unclean water. Also, literacy rates were lower in a lot of those places, so the mothers didn't know how to clean the bottles and couldn't read the instructions on the packaging. Those that did often didn't have the means to carry them out. A lot of them, being poorer, also resorted to watering down the formula to try and make it last longer, but then it wouldn't have enough nutrients for the baby. Nestle downplayed all of this and said it wasn't their responsibility that people here didn't really have access to clean water and that they were just giving people the freedom of choice. Story 10. The Black Sox scandal was a major sports controversy that rocked the baseball world in 1919. It involved members of the Chicago White Sox, one of the best teams in the league at the time, who were accused of throwing the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. The scandal involved 8 players, including shoeless Joe Jackson, who allegedly accepted bribes from gamblers to intentionally lose games. At first, many people thought the scandal was just a conspiracy theory, as the players denied any wrongdoing. The team was arguably in the top position. Some of the accused were insanely popular, and some fans believed that the accusations were just a way to tarnish the team's reputation. However, an investigation uncovered evidence of a complex scheme involving gamblers, team owners, and players. The investigation revealed that the players had definitely accepted bribes, the tune of a couple million today. I'm not a huge sports fan at all, but I am a history fan, and this was one of the most significant scandals in sports history, and it changed a lot of things for the entire sport, including getting a commissioner of baseball. Even though they were technically declared criminally innocent, all 8 players involved were all banned for life, and they will never be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, despite repeated attempts to do so over the decade. Story 11. That corporations openly bribe politicians to get what they want. They call it lobbying to get away with it. Also, political action committees are essentially political money laundering mechanisms, and it's completely legal. In theory, they are meant for independent political associations, paying for lobbying. In reality, as long as you shuffle money around a bit, you can literally siphon an infinite amount of money directly into campaigns and people's pockets. We've made it completely legal for corporations to legally transfer dump trucks of money directly into politicians' pockets, and it's completely anonymous and nearly impossible to track. Story 12. Your iPhone is designed to start getting worse as soon as the new models come out. I remember this being a big deal like 7 or 8 years ago. Someone can fact check me as I'm hazy on the details, but I believe it's related to the battery. Every year, the same week that the new iPhone comes out, the latest iOS becomes available for download. The new iOS is not optimized for your current device's battery, and as such, the phone compromises performance in order to maintain a similar battery life. Coupled with the normal wear and tear on the battery, your phone will start sucking just so the battery can last a little longer. Story 13. The Canadian government actually tried to fry people's brains with ECT in order to fix their depression, thinking that the wiping of neurons that have a negative emotional event will fix their depression. Instead, people ended up losing their memory, suffered inconsistent, and forgot their name, all while still having depression. This was in part funded by the CIA in an effort to understand memory alteration. ECT is still being used in Canada and other nations for cases of major depressive disorder and bipolar. Memory loss and cognitive delays are definitely side effects, but not to the point of forgetting their own names. Patients are made aware of the outcomes of treatment, both positive and negative, which is part of informed consent. Story 14. In 2016, a former reality TV show host vying for political office began working to convince citizens of the United States that the election he was participating in was rigged, only to learn that he had actually won the election. 4 years later, in 2020, when seeking re-election, this same politician attempted to again convince the citizens of the United States that the very same election process that had given him his then current position was rigged. This time, of course, he lost the election. This time, however, he had in fact convinced a large number of people that the election was rigged. And now I can't have a normal family dinner because it's apparently a conspiracy that the United States of America has a voting system that works. Story 15. TikTok is a Chinese Trojan horse. In the future, a lot of damage is going to happen to these young TikTokers when they try to run for political office or try to work for a federal agency that requires secret clearance. If China sees them as a threat, they'll expose all their TikTok app intel and all the data they've stolen in the background without the user's knowledge. And yes, I prefer a Western company doing that to than a Chinese company. Would you install a North Korean app? No? Well, China is run exactly like North Korea. Companies answer to one person only. Story 16. The Deep State. People don't understand that the idea isn't there's a vast conspiracy of people hiding in the government. It's literally the bureaucracy supports its own existence. The people that spend decades working in unelected positions in government wield vast amounts of power, tend to align with one party, and will work to sustain their own jobs. That's not a conspiracy, it's just how things work. It's no different than how a large corporation will tend to accumulate cruft if it's not regularly purged. The difference is that in the government, there's no incentive to purge and a vastly larger amount of options to exert influence on the people that are supposed to be controlling things. The leadership of most federal agencies have more practical power than the average representative. Story 17. I know this is probably obvious to anybody who wasn't raised in it, but that Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement, is a fraud and is easily proven as such. Just look up the provenance of the Book of Abraham. Smith claimed that he could translate ancient languages. He couldn't. And when he came into possession of some Egyptian scrolls, claimed that they were written by Abraham himself, and his translation was made canonical to most of the churches in the Latter-day Saint movement. It was thought that the scrolls were lost in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. But several significant fragments of the papyri showed up at the Met in NYC in 1966. After being examined by professional Egyptologists, including some who were Mormon, it became clear that Smith's translation was nothing more than a total fabrication. It was actually a funerary text that was dated 1,500 years after Abraham is purported to have lived. Not to mention his interpretations of the drawings on the papyri were completely inaccurate. In the last 10 years, the Church has been distancing itself from the literal authorship translation narrative that it once unapologetically embraced, even in my relatively short lifetime. Read the Church's recent essay on the book. It contains many half-truths and some outright lies, including the blatant lie that Joseph Smith never claimed to be able to translate ancient languages. And most of all, it tries to change the long-standing narrative that anybody over the age of 30 in the church remembers being taught in church. Story 18. Russia should use its special services within the borders of the United States and Canada to fuel instability and separatism against neoliberal globalist Western hegemony, such as, for instance, provoke Afro-American racists to create severe backlash against the rotten political state of affairs in the current present-day system of the United States and Canada. Russia should introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, encouraging all kinds of separatism and ethnic, social, and racial conflicts, actively supporting all dissident movements, extremist, racist, and sectarian groups, thus destabilizing internal political processes in the U.S. It would also make sense simultaneously to support isolationist tendencies in American politics. Story 19. Abu Ghraib and the dozens of other black sites run by the U.S. Armed Forces all throughout the Middle East. Hundreds of people unjustly imprisoned, tortured, and photographed for fun by depraved U.S. soldiers who never faced justice. Also, Guantanamo Bay, which basically everyone knows about by now, is still absolutely insane. An illegally held territory in a sovereign country is just a torture camp for innocent people. Also, Ron DeSantis started his career at Guantanamo Bay. Story 20. In September 1950, the U.S. Navy and Army conducted a secret biological warfare test in San Francisco, known as Operation Sea Spray. The test involved spraying two types of bacteria from a Navy ship into the air off the coast of San Francisco for 6 days. The military believed the bacteria were harmless, but the test was actually intended to determine how susceptible a large city would be to a biological weapon attack. The results showed that almost all of San Francisco's 800,000 residents were exposed to the bacteria. The military tracked the spread of the bacteria at 43 sites around the city. Story 21. NASA had a small nuclear reactor partially underground at the Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, now the Glenn Research Center. The reactor was about 50 feet from the Cleveland Hopkins Airport runway. It was decommissioned in the early 1960s, but was still there when I worked in that building in the mid-1960s. The earthen mound is still there, and the rooms underneath. Any odd object you found in a storage locker had to be run by the health physics office to see if it was radioactive. We did find some hot items. I doubt many people have ever heard of this, and I won't tell the name of the facility. I do have a copy of the final report about the facility. If you don't hear from me again, tell the world my story. Story 22. The existence of Operation Northwoods, a proposed plan by the U.S. Department of Defense in the 1960s, sounds like a conspiracy theory, but is actually true. The plan included proposals for covert actions to provoke a war with Cuba, such as staging terrorist attacks in U.S. cities, hijacking planes, and sinking boats of Cuban refugees. The intent was to blame these actions on Cuba to justify military intervention against the Castro regime. President Kennedy ultimately rejected the plan, and it was never executed, but the documents outlining these proposals were later declassified, revealing the extreme lengths to which some military planners were willing to go. Story 23. During the start of World War II, Britain had plans to goad Germany into invading the neutral Scandinavian countries, to have an excuse to occupy Scandinavia as liberators who saved them from Germany, cutting off trade while being able to pressure Germany from the north. It was shelved because the Altmark incident, German tankers sunk by British destroyers in Norwegian waters, happened before they could really get these plans going, which, together with Germany picking up radio chatter about the British plans, led to the German invasion of Denmark and Norway, and Sweden becoming isolated due to Germany occupying both of them and Soviet pushing into Finland, as Hitler feared Britain would not respect Scandinavian neutrality. Originally, the Allies suggested to Sweden and Norway that they could occupy the northern half of each country, using the excuse that they were let in to help Finland against the Soviet, who at the time were still allied to Germany. Both refused as they were neutral, feared German reprisals, and did not believe Britain and France could keep them safe. There was also a second idea where the Allies were planning on landing troops in Norway without consent, occupying the region relatively peacefully, and only stopping if they encountered serious military resistance, but Finland sued for peace before it could happen. Thus, Britain drew up plans to manipulate Germany into taking the first step. Operation Wilfred would see Britain put minefields in Norwegian territorial waters, forcing trade vessels into international waters where they'd be attacked by the Royal Navy. while Sweden and Norway would be falsely accused of violating neutrality. Plan R4 was for Britain to swoop in and save the day instantly after Germany invaded Norway as a response to Operation Wilfred. However, when the Altmark incident happened and Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, Plan R4 failed to be executed properly due to the size of the German fleet present. Despite this, Allied forces had great success in Narvik, the most important harbor, and had alongside Norwegian forces managed to push the Germans all the way to the Swedish border. When France and Benelux were attacked, and the Allied forces abandoned Norway to focus on the French front instead, supposedly only days or even hours before the German forces in the area would have been forced to surrender or hand themselves over to be entered in still neutral Sweden until the end of the war. Story 24. That our industry has been telling us for decades that we cannot live without fossil fuels. Yet it has long been known that there is a maximum limit to CO2. Once it is reached, global warming will accelerate inexorably, and we will starve a large proportion of the world's population. Coke Industries and some actors acted like tobacco companies, saying that smoking is not carcinogenic. People are facing the abyss, and everyone wants to keep driving fast cars, not realizing that it will cost them dearly. Story 25. The Black Sox scandal was a major sports controversy that rocked the baseball world in 1919. It involved members of the Chicago White Sox, one of the best teams in the league at the time, who were accused of throwing the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. The scandal involved 8 players, including shoeless Joe Jackson, who allegedly accepted bribes from gamblers to intentionally lose games. At first, many people thought the scandal was just a conspiracy theory, as the players denied any wrongdoing. The team was arguably in the top position. Some of the accused were insanely popular, and some fans believed that the accusations were just a way to tarnish the team's reputation. However, an investigation uncovered evidence of a complex scheme involving gamblers, team owners, and players. The investigation revealed that the players had definitely accepted bribes, the tune of a couple million today. I'm not a huge sports fan at all, but I am a history fan. And this was one of the most significant scandals in sports history. And it changed a lot of things for the entire sport, including getting a commissioner of baseball. Even though they were technically declared criminally innocent, all 8 players involved were all banned for life, and they will never be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, despite repeated attempts to do so over the decades.